All right, I think I'm sorted now.
I am beginning the broadcast. Here's Peter's wonderful little opening. Eventually, we're going to figure out how to get music to this. I would hum Mahler, but it would scare everybody. And here's the wonderful, exciting world of Troubles in Paradise, the methodology of creationism. Tukin.wordpress.com. If you don't have that on your tabs, why the hell not? So, here we're going to have a neat little show today, I hope. That will be about something that you think doesn't have anything to do with creationism, but boy, does it. And that is how creationists, younger creationists, trample way more than just geology and evolution and cosmology and all the other stuff that they do. I can't recall whether it was Peter or somebody else, or maybe it could have been you, who tossed me onto this particular creationist that had been afoot. And I looked up his website, and I put the links up on that, the connecting stuff. Patrick Nurre. And it turns out he had done a thing on Egyptology and Egyptian chronology. And I go, yay! Because almost all of his stuff is private lectures. He goes around the country and does stuff. And he's written a bunch of silly little books that obviously I don't have enough money to buy. Unless I were really rolling in it. I wouldn't really want to have those, but they'd be fun to have. But some of his videos are up on YouTube. And one I linked to happened to be on Egyptology. So I had to wade through an hour and a half of this thing. It took him the first half hour just to get past the, oh, everything is just naturalistic assumptions, and therefore nothing in the regular views can be trusted, and you have to go back to the Bible. And finally, after he settled down, he started presenting pretty much what I was expecting him to, which is he had to secondarily riff off of a very narrow group of creationists who are trying to rearrange Egyptian chronology to fit the standard biblical chronology. For those of you who aren't up on standard biblical chronology, the Earth supposedly was created around 6,000 years ago. And then about 4,500 years ago, there was a big splashy flood, details pending. And then a ways back after that, about 1500 BC, was the Exodus. And it was just pretty much as Cecil B. DeMille depicts in the famous movie, minus the Technicolor and VistaVision. But basically, that's the standard view. Ironically, that movie would be reflecting, oh, hi, Peter. That movie would be reflecting the modern view of Egyptology, which puts the Exodus down around 1200 BC, associated with Ramesses II, Brenner in the movie. And there's a good circumstantial case to be made for that, because there are references in the Exodus account that relate to places that were only made in the time of Ramesses, High Ramesses, and all of that. So the idea of cramming it back farther in time is a problem. Now, there are a lot of people over the years in fringe who had tried rearranging the Egyptology to fit their model of the old Exodus. And Emanuel Velikovsky was one of those, and one of these days I'll have to do a whole show on that one. But the major problem that I could see that was going to face young Earth creationism was the fact that if the flood took place 2350 BC, how didn't notice? Because they were busy building pyramids. You know, you would have thought, wow, that's something. We're underwater. And you don't find any references to that. So it occurred to me that eventually creationists were going to have to move Egypt. They would have to not merely do what Velikovsky tried to do, which was recalibrate things to fit a 1500 BC Exodus date and bring in a errant comet and all that crap, but something much more serious. Everything in Egypt has to be moved past the flood, because they can't allow anything in Egypt to be pre-flood, because there's a total continuity in Egyptian culture, in their writing styles, in their architecture, in their costumes, in their traditions, their gods. Everything is all standard, right down to the end. And if you have any of that dating before the flood, then you have to wonder, how come it turns back into that after the flood? What, Noah's kids come in and immediately start acting like Egyptians? This doesn't make any sense. So if you're going to try to reconcile the historical data with the biblical account, you're going to have to move all of it. Move the pyramids, you got to, all the pre-dynastic stuff, the whole 9 yards.
Well, on top of that, RJ, you are going to have to compress it by a significant amount.
Yeah, it's like a telescope. Just imagine if you were going to decide that everything that happened since Lincoln actually took place only in the last 50 years. You're going to have to do a lot of accordioning.
Oh, wow.
And you're going to have a terrible problem when you start trying to figure. Oh, the example actually that I used, I'll still trot it out in the Dinomania. Imagine if you were trying to argue that all the events that happened at 42nd Street and Fifth Avenue were actually taking place simultaneously. So the image was, because I happen to know historically that the Empire State Building exists where the old Waldorf Astoria Hotel used to be, and the Waldorf Astoria exists where the old Astor mansions were. And so one of them, the reason why it's Waldorf Astoria is the Waldorf Hotel was built by one of the Astor kids who couldn't stand his aunt who lived next door, so he tore his mansion down and built a damned hotel there just to irritate her. And she stuck it out for years until she finally moved uptown with all the other ones farther up Fifth Avenue. And they built the Astoria part of the hotel. And they even had doorways separating them so that they could theoretically close them off in case they decided to split up. And she even made sure that her architect had one more floor on her side, even though they looked the same size. So it was a lot of one-upsmanship. And then that was torn down in the 1920s to make way for the Empire State Building. So the modern Waldorf Astoria, which is uptown, is not the one that existed back in the 1890s. So I envisage the notion that you try to compress all of that together. You've got the case of Mrs. Astor trying to have a party of her 400 in her ballroom of her mansion at the same time that all of these damn people are rushing by trying to register at the hotel, and then all of them suddenly looking up and hearing the great crash as the B-24 slams into the Empire State Building up above, and debris is raining down outside from the engine and on fuel and all of that. No, you can't have all of that happen at once. It won't work.
It won't work. That doesn't work under any circumstances.
And that's, yeah. And so it's a big row for any anti-evolutionist to try to rearrange the history. And Egyptology not only exists on its own merits, but interconnects by artifacts, by pottery styles, by letters back and forth between one monarch and another, so that you can interconnect Babylonian chronology. And now they're learning a bit more about the Hittites and figuring about what they're doing with the Greeks and the interactions with the Mycenaeans and the Phoenicians. And there's just a huge mess of interconnections. And by trade things, you can even track even farther west stuff, or east, in from China, things that are along the Silk Road, and things that are interconnecting with cultures that interconnect with cultures. So it's a massive mess to figure that you can just go through with a meat axe and decide to chop out sections and scrunch chronology down and all of that. So it was fun watching him try. The link up to the video, and anybody who has a good Pepto-Bismol available to sit through an hour and a half of crap could go ahead and do it. But what was fun about it was to apply source methods to it, which is what I do. Duh. That you have to wait until he mentions something factual. And suddenly he would have put up a picture of something, or mention an archaeologist, or mention an archaeological site, or a particular name. At that point, I had to freeze frame, put on the pause, and start Googling like mad to start finding out what the hell they were talking about and see, could I ground it in some technical literature? Could I find out what was going on in the backgrounds? Was his representation of the archaeology even correct? And where was he getting his stuff from? Most of the time, no surprise, he was never giving sources. And once in a while, he would mention some of his secondary sources. Turns out Ashton and Down, who's the book I put the listing up, and also Rohl, Rohl, who actually is an archaeologist, even if he's a fringe one. Oh, Marianne! Hello, Marianne!
Hello!
Well, hello! How are you doing?
Oh, pretty good. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. I was enjoying your takedown of the creationists on Twitter this evening.
Yes, I keep on warning them it's a contact sport. I hope to build up a reputation where when they see me enter the discussion, somebody is going to say, "Oh, you're doomed."
You're done. I've had people
No,
say
Hundreds on your case. Run while you still can. Get out, get out.
Oh, it's down. We gotta go.
I'll be the one with the popcorn.
Yeah. Anyway, so I've been bringing up this issue of that creationists, young Earth creationists, do something far more insidious than intelligent designers do. Intelligent designers pretty much are a very niche market. They're the creator created bacterial flagella, and they're happy with the Big Bang, and that's about it. They don't really worry about systematics. They don't. There's no counterpart of that, of baraminology in intelligent design. They're very vague in general. They could care less about Egyptian chronology. They could care less about the Exodus. They could not worry at all.
Except that they should.
Young Earth creation.
Here's the thing: they should care about Egyptology because that was the closest major civilization to what they were thinking of as what they were thinking of as Israel at the time. Now, to a couple of things. Number one, I am the guilty party with Patrick Nurre. He was part of he was part of a couple of weeks ago. We put him on. We had him on Science Strike Force. We had him on movie night as part of an Eric Hogan video. So that's the chain there. I finally broke down last week and worked out exactly and grabbed his website and showed it to you.
Yeah, and you can see what I did with it. What I did was to see what the nature of his website was, and the fact that it was very little fact checking you could do on it because he had he had no text sources there. In other words, he does not write out anything he says. It was all either to his books that you'd have to buy, or to his various lecture things that he could come and prattle on about. And his long list of lecture topics. Where my little eyeballs went, yay, Christmas, was when I found that some of his stuff was online, which meant now I could access it. And the whole essence of source methods is that everything that wishes to make fact claims can be analyzed by source methods approach. Videos are slow because they have so little content. But the texts are very, very important. Have you considered putting your child in flectovarethane or in a block of plastic like wort?
I've considered that, but it didn't ever work. Hold on a second.
Sweet little things. Oh gosh, yes. That's nothing you can do about them. Anyway,
James, I'm a little bit disappointed. Why didn't you invite Ben Carson? I mean, if you want a specialist on the
great granaries of Joseph. Yes. I would love to. Well, I don't know whether or not we could keep him awake long enough, whether or not he would doze off on us there. But the thing about Nurre is that he is professing to be a quasi-expert on stuff, dating and all this kind of thing. And you can tell his method by the demonstration of it. Poor Ben Carson is an 18 miles from the data stream pundit. All he's doing is simply repeating stuff that he imbibed somewhere deep in his Adventist rearing, but he's not really going on about it in any sense of details. But Nurre insists on lecturing, and he's going around, and you can invite him, and he'll talk to your little church. It was fun to see the size of the audience, in fact. It was a very plushly done theater in some church, which probably seated about 100 or so, and it was only sparsely attended. Judging from the camera fields, and when they got to the Q&A at the end, it was maybe about a third of the seats were filled. Most of them old farts like me, and a few younger people who generally kind of sat back there and didn't say anything. There were some softball questions at the end. So there was a half an hour of wind-up, and then about a half an hour of Q&A, and then about a half an hour of actual claims, of which he was building off of a PowerPoint. And that proved to be inadvertently extremely useful, because there he would be making fact claims about particular archaeologists or details. I was able to find a lot of the information, so I could find out how he was quoting stuff out of context, and like, duh. And in one case, he actually put up a quote from a 2015 book that I was able to track down the original online. They had the excerpts of it available on Amazon, and it's clear he didn't use the original quote material because he has text in it that's not in it. So he's riffing off of somebody's secondary account, as yet unidentified, and that already is putting him on bad dog land when it comes to scholarship. So these are all the little cues. that you can find out about somebody's scholarly method even before you get to the content level, which is what I was really anxious to get. So there's this Lucan site. He calls it a completely different name, but that's the site that it's generally known by. And then I found out that an awful lot of the sites, it's called Kehun in the creationist literature, and a creation wiki, it turned out, had quite a lot of crap that was basically repeating a lot of the same stuff he does. So how much of his stuff is secondary material he's gleaned from somebody else parasitically and not telling you, and how much is stupid that he's doing all on his own, it's hard to tell at the moment. I'll be fun to take a look at all that. But I was delighted at some of the stuff I could find. There were some great technical articles, which I didn't put in the linkages because I was in rather a rush getting this thing organized this morning, and well as doing Twitter joust. But there was stuff on this one papyrus, for example, technical papers that were on how it had been misinterpreted by people over the years. And that was obviously of relevance to what Nurre was doing, misrepresenting it. And then one, Sir Flinders Petrie, who anybody who knows Egyptology knows he's one of the grand old man of the thing. He was a devout religious believer, but a very major figure in the area. He was being put up by Nurre as an authority figure for supposedly finding the little baby bodies of the children that were killed in the slaughter of the innocents in the time of the Exodus period during the firstborn. And find any evidence that he ever did that, that Petrie ever said that. And I even have Petrie's accounting that he did as a scholarly book from 1923 that was available online. I downloaded the PDF, and there's no mention of any of that in there. So I don't even know where Nurre is getting his stuff from. It's possible he's filtering it from, I haven't gone into Down's thing completely on that. He may have been from somewhere else altogether, because clearly Nurre is not somebody with a tight grip on his source base. He just will come up with stuff. There was a picture of Joseph, this Egyptian statue of a red-headed guy that's therefore not Egyptian, who is wearing this coat of many colors, and he supposedly thinks this is Joseph. And what was fascinating was I couldn't find anything on it. I couldn't find that image anywhere on the internet. It could be just my lack of searching skills. But when I tried to look up Joseph coat of many colors, statues found in 1950-something, every clue that he put in his claim to try to Google up to find out where he would have a source for this, I couldn't find anything about it. Now, would it be possible that that was a perfectly legitimate, real Egyptian person? Yeah. In fact, there is a thing that I already knew about in another area, that there are a bunch of red-headed Egyptians, and they show up in some of the mummies. They can do, there's some interesting little DNA haplotypes going around about this. Now, to what extent that connects up at all to the particular Judaic version that they want to have, or to Canaanites, or to Semites, or any other haplotypes, I haven't gotten that deep into the research yet. But I suspect already I'm farther deep than Nurre ever got.
My 3-year-old is into that shit deeper than Nurre will ever be.
Yeah.
And I did more research at the age of 6 than I think Nurre will ever get to.
Yeah. Well, I always cut some people slack in terms of where before I learned sound method in the 20s when I was in college, and finally weaned myself off of some of the dumb things I was doing and started really paying attention to primary source material. It's very easy, and especially if you get some of the dumb young, because you're full of pea and vinegar, you think you know the world, you can't be wrong, and so that's something I always had to key in there. Were you about to say something, Peter?
Yeah, well, I was asking, I was thinking, do any of the great young Earth creationists have anything to say about this? Because it's actually it's a topic that I haven't come across that much. At least nothing on Egyptology. We had our loon last week or the week before, who claimed that we actually have Jesus' blood because he was thinking that everything Ron Wyatt ever found was actually real.
It is one of those wackaloons that's even regarded as a wackaloon point of regular creationism. They're very, very leery of him. And there are a lot of people in the conservative religious camp that think he's just a complete numbnuts. That has to be born in. I think we've got some questions about that date of that red-headed Egyptian queen or statue and the dates on it. What I will do, I'm trying to open up my file here, and it's always a pain in the ass to try to do when I'm online because it fills up so much of the computer failing. But I'll try to find the minute level where he brings up this point in the video that I link to, and so anybody can follow through on there and do then try to find a search on it. He didn't give any dates. He didn't give any provenance other than the date that the statue was supposedly found. So whenever you're looking at any video or even reading a book, to be pondering about provenance, and you should be applying the standard to everybody, people that you agree with just as much as people not. One of the things that I found disappointing with Bill Nye's book, Creationism and other things, is that he was pretty superficial on source material. He wasn't really offering much on material. I knew what he was riffing off of usually, but even there I'd have to go, yeah, you know, it's not quite as detailed as you like to think. Here we go, Nurre. Alrighty, let's see. Bing, 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 bing. Syrian monarchy found. Yeah. Oh, now that I got it up, I might as well just discuss some of the thing. The survey of it. So we'll guide you through the wonderful world of Nurre's video. It's an hour and 6 minutes in, he tries to tag Egyptology as being merely a thing from the forgot. He hates enlightenment. Ooh, nasty enlightenment. And what he tried to argue, which is a lie, banished the Bible. You were not supposed to accommodate anything in the Bible. You were not supposed to pay attention to it. No. What the Enlightenment did was to say that just because it was in the Bible didn't mean you accepted it as gospel truth. It needed corroboration. And they were perfectly happy to try to find corroboration for stuff. And if they could find corroboration, fine. If not, you didn't take precedent just because it was in a Bible text. So they were treating the Bible like every other document, that it would be subject to rigorous analysis. And needless to say,
it failed.
You get into trouble. And so 9 minutes in, he starts putting up a bunch of dates as to when he thinks was, and then he goes off on a long Glee Club rant on Newton, Kepler, and Bible believers, but none of them older than 26. So what the hell is that? And then he does some authority quoting down here about 26 minutes in. And back to 27. So I'm trying to find the spot. First mentions David Down, archaeologist, he calls him. And even if he pretends to be one, claim he does. That's 29 minutes in. Supposedly quotes Down and says, I've used carbon-14 dating. I don't know that he's ever made use of any of that stuff. So he does a reliance on other people that are unreliable. Oh, I suppose I could do this way. Just do search.
Why is he carbon? Why is he? What are we talking about? Rock here? Why would he use? Why would he bother?
Well, he's got to have authority figures, and remember, it's all part of a gigantic universal package in young Earth creationism, where everything is all lumped together. So they can jump as easily to stellar dating, to radiometric dating, to everything else. And since modern archaeology makes use of radiocarbon dating, it has to argue that it's all kind of made up. That they only make use of it when it supports their position. But in fact, carbon dating is meticulously used in very and calibrates beautifully with things we can physically date. So that's one of the ways that you can calibrate how well radiocarbon dating works. In fact, there was a recent paper, I think, in PNAS on it, where they were being able to isolate things and physically match up material based on the radiocarbon dating. But anyway, he's got this, he contends that Joseph was in Egypt during Sesostris I, supposedly this bloody statue of him. So it's about 53 minutes in or so, and you can find out he shows the picture several times, and if anybody wants to plow down that far, and the little thing,
which I may
and to
actually
try
do.
to find out its provenance, hit me back. You can get on Twitter or at #tip and let me know about that, because I'd like to fill my defense wall on that, because I'm assuming, my gut feeling is it's a perfectly real statue. But the fascinating thing is that it probably isn't what he wants it to be, because nobody else seems to be saying that. You'd think it would have been popping up in standard creationist apologetics, and the picture would be showing up as, aha, here we have Joseph.
Could it be?
But anyway,
could it be that he's referring to the theater musical Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor?
Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Yeah, he might as well use that as a source. Frankly, he might as well try to get his Egyptology from Cecil B. DeMille or the movie Cleopatra. But although they are, I'll give props to old DeMille. He was actually very meticulous in all of the archaeology stuff that he used in the thing. So they were very, very careful to make sure costumes looked right. If you look at the games people are playing in the movie, that they're actually drawn on stuff that they found in archaeological digs. It's twaddle in so many ways, and it's kitsch in so many ways. And plus, it's a spectacular print now that whenever they trot it out, every Easter, I think ABC shows it. They're using the new remastered print that they have on the Blu-ray. And whoa, you can see how beautiful VistaVision was as a film process. So just from a visual point of view, it's fabulous. And I love Nina Foch in it. She's my favorite character in the DeMille movie. This is a slight digression. She almost always played kind of icy, femme fatale sorts. That's what she played in American in Paris. But she got to play a mother character in here, and I always have kind of a soft spot for Nina Foch. Anyway, that was a slight aside on here. So we are at about halfway point here. Do we want to have some direct feedbacks on things? And
Stephen found a picture, James. I don't know if you caught that.
Oh, okay. Let me. I'll pull that up on my linkage there and see what I can find out about it. And I will either go yay or nay.
I have it. If you want to see it, I could share it.
Joseph's coats of many colors. And well, there's a website. I don't see a picture here.
I got it. Just a minute.
7, it has text on it. Statue was found at Tel Atabata. Yeah, I'll put a bookmark on that, and we'll get back, because now I got some names to refer to, and I'll be able to poke around about that. Thank you so much, Stephen. Isn't that fellow Brian to do? And that's kind of the thing that I'm hoping happens with the Science Strike Force Network. Lots of people with lots of skills. And I suddenly see we got somebody new who's just material. Oh, that's going to go for it. You put a different avatar up there. I'm used to seeing your Einstein avatar. You're throwing me off if you do that, Peter.
That's the picture.
Yeah. Let me go ahead. Let me give you a thing for sharing. Or if you let me see where we got thing to put on your menu to be able to share on that. That's not the one I'm looking at. Yeah.
If I might make the comment, younger creationists have some issues as they try to ignore Egyptology, and that's where I keep getting my giggles. Is they claim a global flood, but the Egyptians missed it completely. They forgot it ever. Apparently forgot it ever happened. 2500 BCE. We're looking in that neighborhood. We had Cheops and Khufu constructing the Great Pyramids.
Yeah. It would have seemed a really important thing for them not to have missed. And it would have been a nice feather in their cap if there had been such references. But the problem is, the big snag is that they've got to have everybody wiped out in the flood, and everything that happens after the flood is Noah's kids breeding like rabbits and spreading all over the world. So they have a problem accounting for building big things really fast with too few people. And you even Down and others who have tried to bump into this issue of post-flood dispersal of human beings, they have no problem with exponential rabbit growth rate to get 1 billion people in a short period of time. You know, if everybody is having incest with each other and people are living to be 800 years old. And so you can demographically generate a lot of people eventually. but you're still starting out with only 8. And it takes a while to get that curve going, and they've never attempted to try to map out when they think things really are happening, what was being built at what time, and how many people would there be to do that, not only with Egypt, but Mesopotamia and Europe and China and the New World. You've got just a pile up of data out there, and it's going to be a Sisyphus slope. They're never going to be able to manage it. They can't even manage it with Egypt. But the more interconnections that they put in, you're just screwed.
Well, and then you talk about the Chinese who could already read and keep track of their own dynasties the same way the Egyptians could. Or the Indus
if
Valley.
anything,
It had a huge written record during that period.
You've got a better continuity in them going back quite a long ways, because their written language congeals so fairly quickly and goes back in protoform even farther. And of course, they don't mention a flood either, at least not the kind that pops up. If you look at creationist apologetics, they take this flood of the Yangtze River, where it's obviously referring to a failure of an irrigation project and the designer of it getting into big shit with the emperor for being a screw up. And they've tried to manipulate this to refer to the biblical style flood where all the animals are saved. And boy, they've got to parse their way through it real careful.
And except that the Yangtze River flooding happened before, if I remember correctly, before our biblical flood.
Oh yeah, I think it's I seem to think it's like 4000 BC or something like that. There's some new technical papers on that, and I don't swear by it on the date on that. And there was just a brand new paper, I think in PNAS, that just popped out this last week. That's on the dating of the starting of irrigation projects in China, going back like 9,000 years. And it's just, in other words, the Chinese apparently are doing things before the Earth was made. Boy, those pesky little Chinese, they're just getting down, aren't they?
But we have evidence of petroglyphs along the Nile terraces in the 10th millennium BCE.
It's just put me up to another thing, so I'm checking that out. Keep on going.
Still have climate change and overgrazing happening in 6000 BCE. Give or take a little bit.
Problem with that link, Brian, I think that one popped up a failure on there, but it may be my browser that's having a shtick. Let me just also do obligatory plug, since we're in the middle of the show. It takes me a while to set everything up. I'm an old fart to do stuff, and I apologize for not being quick on the draw. Okay, here's our patrons. For this project on Patreon. I will call attention to the patreon.com, where you may help indeed. My goal would be like 100 people who were giving like $5 a month steady, like $60 a year. That's, you know, like a couple movie nights these days with popcorn. That would be spectacular. And we're not yet quite at that stage, but then we've also got the GoFundMe down here. But anyway, Stephen and John and Direwolf and Eatmeal and Yui and Mona Hayford and Hendril and Jen B and Jody and Steigels and Alex Stone and Totes Real, I love to say it that way, and Paul Williams, thank you very much for helping the project along. And we can certainly use more. And then for the fasty donator types, there's the GoFundMe.com, DCGo, where you can do $5 if you like, or more if you can afford it. Don't hawk the house to do it. Never hurt your finances, but I'd love to see more of the crowd out there. At the moment, we got about 160 people who have supported TIP, and that's out of 7 billion people. We have a long way to go. And
you're never going to get to that number, RJ. You know that.
No, I know that. Yes, that's snowball's hell, chance in hell bit. But you know, I would be satisfied, you know, with even having as many GoFundMe contributors as I have followers on Twitter. Hear that, Twitter? I got 2,000 people on Twitter, but I don't have 2,000 supporters. So the crowdfunding thing is easily doable. And anyway, there's the plug on that. So the take-home at the moment is that unlike intelligent design has axes to grind that have a lot of doctrinal things to defend, and they've got to shred a lot Psychology is another area that you think Scientologists have problems with psychology. So too ultimately will creationists, because their ideas of the mind and how morality and other things are processed in the brain, if they ever get around to thinking about it, is going to have to, which they don't. Yeah, in fact, all anti-evolutionists pay very little attention to neuroscience. There's just a tiny number of technical papers that they've ever even bothered to look at. And we don't get much on there. Oh, anyway, let me get back to my, since I still got that file open. Anybody who has an anal retentive nature can plow down and they can get a lot of things involved. Track down what few sources he brings up and what pictures and sites he refers to, and then you can start tracking down the background information and find out, you know, the obvious questions is, yes, he says something, but is it true that it was true? And anybody who might rely on Nurre, how did you fact check it? To give many sources. The very fact that it's so vague and generalized, and even doesn't reference when he's referring to creationist sources typically. And some of the stuff he's offering up as arguments are clearly, at 1 hour in, for example, Nurre claims, quote, there is evidence of Moses in Egypt. Amenemhet III had 2 daughters. No sons have been identified. One daughter, Sobekneferu, is said by Josephus to have been childless and to be the adopted mother of Moses.
May I interject here? Anybody that's actually paying attention to Josephus is really going to have a problem just off the cuff. Josephus wasn't born until after Jesus died, and even if he had been, he has nothing but anecdotal material, even of the life of Jesus.
As I began to look up on this, could Joseph have ever known about Amenemhet III and Sobekneferu, since those people are only coming out the translation of Egyptian documents that were only taking place in the 19th century on? So right off the bat, you have to argue, I don't think Joseph ever said anything about Amenemhet III. He can't. He couldn't have known anything about any of that stuff. And so somewhere along the line, Nurre information in a way to make it sound like drawing on who knows who, and not understanding that he's trying to mesh English and metric and squash together stuff without really realizing it. So the same methodology that allows him to think the Earth is 6,000 years old, that he thinks that Yellowstone, the Great Canyon of the Yellowstone was formed in the flood, and a whole bunch of other charming little things that he's arguing about, that same method is shredding stuff on Egyptology. Now there it's a completely different discipline, and it's also insulting to Egyptologists. That he's implying that all of them are secular atheists, which is simply not true. Never been true. And so he's trying to make this a culture camp, culture warrior issue, and land-based, which it is not. It's a matter of meticulous inscriptions and tracking down things and find who mentions who and all that sort of stuff. And you do get into fun times when you're trying to translate stuff. Oh, another one that he made, attacked Champignon for supposedly mistranslating something. It wasn't a mistranslation at all. It was a particular Egyptian name with a particular character in the Bible, Shishak. Still regarded as the most plausible explanation. So, but it isn't a mistranslation. It would be an identification or misidentification. Or Nurre doesn't even know how to use the terminology here. Is that shocking anybody to hear?
No. Now, if you will look to your right, Mr. RJ, I left you a link here, and the video itself is not important. What is important is a chunk of the description, which should be read as dramatic a voice as possible.
Okay, well, I will look into that at the moment, and I suppose you want me to give my dramatic. I want me to use my very dramatic voice.
Yes, do please, because this is actually the Northwest Creation Network out in Bothell.
I bumped into them occasionally on the sources.
But this one here actually ties directly to what we're discussing here and suggests exactly why they've been avoiding it. No, really, go look. I'm telling you.
I'll try to bring out, yes, we're getting an opening curiosity thing. Oh, this is skip. I'm waiting for, at the moment, nothing is coming up other than just the video. It's taking a while to pull up so I can see their description.
We don't need the video at all. It's just Patrick Nurre going on again about
I'm not getting the thing yet, so I can see what their description is. What's it? DeMille personally narrated sections of and he sort of had this very patrician accent, and I can't quite do him yet. Or, oh, seminar by Patrick Nurre, video that I was looking at.
Mm-hmm. This one's
or one near to it. Yeah, I think it's a slightly different one. So I will read this.
Page when I went looking.
Should we be concerned about? Oh, in fact, what I'll do, a dumbass. I'm slow on the uptake. We'll share this along with. Where's my little green arrow?
He's hiding.
I'm not intuitively. God damn it!
I don't even need the green arrow. I just hit the enter key usually.
And it stops. The feedback loops you get on these things are annoying. Come on, come on, come on, come on. There you go. There we go. Let's bring up the damn menu. How many take to move a goddamn cursor? Okay. So you are seeing this up here. Concerned about Egyptian chronology. Isn't this just a side issue? Few people realize that Egyptian chronology is considered by modern archaeologists as the gold standard of chronology. That means that it is regarded as an accurate record of history. But there is a problem. Bum, bum, bum. The Egyptian chronology, as modern archaeologists understand it, stretches the history of mankind beyond the biblical timeline for the creation and the flood. How is it possible that the pyramids could still be standing if they were built before the flood? We are left either with a destroyed faith in the biblical chronology. This seminar will help straighten out the mess and present some alternatives to the current Egyptian chronology. About the speaker, trained in secular geology, boo, hiss, but after becoming a Christian, he began to...
The front part of that was the important bit. They acknowledge that there's a problem. We've already been talking about.
So they recognize that. It only was a matter of time. I was talking way back when I was first working on Dynamania. Only a matter of time before creationists were going to have to start putting rollers underneath Egyptian chronology, because it was inevitable. They can't allow any chronology system to it all has to be formatted into the thing. And that means that, never mind books talking about the age of rocks, where even today you find that the state of Oklahoma will have rules in place de facto that if they don't want to have teachers mentioning how old rocks are in geology class. They officially a pro-evolution policy, but they don't want to annoy people by talking about all those pesky millions of years. All that historical material that doesn't fit in with their frame, all the stuff that you find in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences and Science and Nature and Journal of Archaeology and all these other ones, is potentially fair game for them to attack and dismiss. And that's dangerous. And it shows that if you have a methodology of the type that Nurre has in his brain, there's no stopping them. BJS, do I have too many tabs open, going a bit glitchy? It could very well be, yes. I had a few open there, but now I'm back down to kind of my minimalist position here. Hopefully that'll be a little bit better. Even though I've got a computer that serves my needs, it can get a little pesky when it comes to handling too many things. And if I try to do searches online or open up files like I did with my word processor there, it gets a little bit clunky. And my apologies, BJ. Yeah, she mentions the destroyed faith hypothesis, and that plays a role in it, definitely. One of the things that separates the mind of the intelligent designer from the mind of the young earth creationist is how easily they can accept metaphorization and picky-choosy. everybody does picky-choosy in religious apologetics. They're things they want to deal with and others that they don't. But young Earth creationists are particularly anal retentive on that, because they really recognize that if anything in the Bible is wrong, then it basically pulls the rug out from under the whole thing. If you have a mind that can allow, your Bishop Spong type, that can easily have giant swaths of it wrong, and yet he'll keep bits and pieces of it as being true. My favorite Spongism was when he said that the Easter story is not literally true, it is profoundly true. And I go, what the hell does that mean? And if you got a mind that can figure that out, then boy, you can go anywhere. So everybody rationalizes in this area. They just rationalize a little bit different about what they decide to rationalize about. Young Earth creationists will flush all the secular science down the drain. The more liberal types will metaphorize like mad, but there's always some little nuggets they can't give in on. And it's fun to see. Yeah, jump in.
Okay. The earliest known evidence of Egyptian hieroglyphs appear on pottery vessels dated to about 3200 BCE. That's 1,000 years ago now.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see, too, how another factor that has to be borne out is how we can see these transitional forms in writing forms. And if everybody...
And even better, I have a source for that, page 69 in the Oxford Illustrated History of Ancient Egypt, from what was printed in about 2000, which means their
you've got a lot of that.
Can be tracked back. Their source can
There's been scholarly work on the origin of all the different written languages. In fact, they've even now started to make some progress on the Kripu, that weird little system that was used to keep record keeping of. An awful lot of writing, certainly for the Inca system and also for Babylonian, was basically record keeping. You've got so many seeds in the pot, and you got to make that, and you're storing them away, and you got to know who owned the pot and all that stuff. And so a lot of languages develop out of accounting, dealing with myth making. And later on, once they figure out that they can write down shit as well as keep records of things, then language takes on a completely new direction. It's intriguing to see, too, the weird attempts to Israelize Egypt that I was pointing out, I think before the show started, about the weird thing that Nurre decided, or rather somebody that Nurre is riffing off of, decided that some Israelite visited Egypt and brought the new Babylonian mathematics. This was so superior. And it's that reason why Khufu's pyramid is now straight-sided and perfect, because now he's making use of this new knowledge that was carried by an Israeli intermediary. Teeny little problem. The Egyptians had already worked out straight-sided pyramids and had already built one before Khufu's one. So there again,
long before those people even existed.
Yeah, and that also this would have been right around the time of the flood if the standard chronology is done. So you got to see the worse than from Cecil B. DeMille's 10 Commandments, where you've got everybody moving the obelisk on the rollers in the show. You've got to put rollers under the entire Egyptian chronology and all chronologies connected to them and any chronologies in the world that trace back before the flood. And everything's got to go downstream. So you're going to have a mess in the Texas textbook commissions if such people ever can get into even more charge than they are, and they get to the point where they make an issue out of it. It hasn't been an issue in education so far because the Downs of the world are only getting on the field in the early 2000s and are yet very niche. And but it's if you could imagine a President Pence and Betsy DeVos's education department lasting 2 Trump terms or something like that, you could see that there might be some complaints about these things popping up, because you're going to have people that are going to see a Nurre lecture and they're going to go and get the book by Ashton and Down, and it's just wonderful, and we need to teach that controversy and present this information. And what exactly will the poobahs at the Discovery Institute do about that little puppy?
Yeah, I'd like to see Casey Luskin bending over backwards to try and pull that out.
Yeah.
Well, no, we couldn't see Casey
No,
because he doesn't work there anymore. But Behe,
yeah,
I'd like to see
no
Behe try and
idea.
send it over.
Behe is we know how Behe interacts with creationists, and that is he doesn't. He's appeared on several stages when he's been lecturing on intelligent design at the same venues where young Earth creationists and old Earth creationists and others have been doing. He's been on several conferences of those. And as far as I can tell, he never criticizes their work directly. He pays no attention to them. He just simply presents his intelligent design talking points. And that's as much as he goes. If he has an opinion on it, personally, I've never heard him discuss it anywhere. He's not an old Earth, a young Earth creationist, so he doesn't have to worry about that. Steve Meyer, I know, actually did interact with Dwayne Gish at times. He would be at creationist conferences where Gish was there, and he had recounted when he was still up here at Whitworth about how he had he would discuss with him, like on the plane or something like that, about creationism. But it doesn't translate into the talk. And in his published material, or in any of the stuff you'll ever find at the Discovery Institute, there is not a single criticism of any young Earth creationist dogmatic claim, ever. 100% failure rates a pattern.
And here's a good one for you. We can actually, if you want to go for gold standards, we can work the history of the Indus Valley, China and Japan, funnily enough, back to 40,000 BCE or earlier. The Jomon period in Japan's history runs from 40,000 BCE, or from about 10 to 14,000 BCE, and
yeah, that 40,000 was getting my hackles up. Yeah, yeah. Be careful of what digits you put in there, Caucus Squirrel.
Well, the Jomon period technically refers to an area starting at about 40 to 35,000 BCE for actual proper inhabitation. But we're still looking at areas thereafter. We have archaeological evidence for all of this stuff, and it's the same type of thing that we run into in Egypt. We have plenty of evidence going back to even 10,000 BCE of actual societies existing.
Yeah, basically what happens is it looks like all over the world, wherever there's a really good river, that's a nice place to settle down. As soon as the ice walls go away and the climate kind of warms up, people start settling down and doing that agricultural thing, and pretty soon they have little bull cults and they've got fun stuff going on, and they're doing all sorts of things. And hey, let's all get together and heave those stones up on a big megalith. And so there's an awful lot of things that they're approaching on this matter. And there's such a huge and wonderful array of archaeological work that's been done over the last 100 years or more. And to find idiot interlopers like Down and Company, and then secondary idiot interlopers like Nurre coming along and siphoning up this gibberish and functionally by proxy flushing down the drain the work of thousands of diligent scientists is offensive and annoying.
Okay.
So we're
completely
any further?
It's entertaining in its own way, though.
Jump in.
It's entertaining in its own way, because you can pull even just a Wikipedia check on what some of these people are saying. It provides the lie almost instantly, and with all the citations you can find on a typical Wikipedia article, you can work out definitively what they're doing wrong and how.
Oh yeah, these are we've shown already on Sci-Strike's movie night about you can take any subject matter whatsoever that is done by wooists, and you can apply a source methods analysis to it, and you can ultimately learn new things, but not because they have new knowledge. It's because you're looking up the stuff they don't, and you discover things that they don't, and suddenly you're more informed, you're richer, you have a better defense wall, and they're starting to be farther back behind the curve. So I have no problem with the idea of reading creationist material or looking at creationist videos when you understand the framework of how you do it. Not to lose your temper with my little notes taking, waiting for, if we had a little marker that went along like a tracker on the trailer, the bottom end of CNN or whatever that goes across Fox News and all that, the banner that goes across, and it would instead represent data content. Where it'd be flatlined through huge swaths. And so about through the first 25 or 30 minutes of Nurre's speech, it would be just dead zone. And then occasionally there would be some information that is being presented, and there would be a blip up. But of course, it would be a red line because it's incorrect information. And you would actually have been looking up to find out how he's misrepresenting his source material. And when you find out that he does that with 100% failure rate, basically nothing he says is legitimate. He scurries around and siphons off stuff. There was the thing of one of the pharaohs that they had. Well, he finally pinned down, and I won't open my files again, so I won't cause any weird stuff to go on in my sound. But the pharaoh Meneptah or something like that, that's supposedly the pharaoh of Exodus, in their version. And if you look back in the history of which pharaoh is the pharaoh of Exodus, this is like a cottage industry because they can't figure it out. There's been legions of Egyptologists that have tried to pin this thing down, other than Ramesses II, the major one. But any attempt to rearrange it gets into trouble. Well, here he got this thing where supposedly this pharaoh of Exodus was a cruel tyrant, according to Nurre. According to who? And as far as I could tell, there's no historical evidence for any of that stuff. He quoted him as saying that this was a pharaoh of the oppressor, and it's about how you should go after enemies and other things. Well, he was a warrior. He conquered a bunch of wars going on during his time frame. So he says basically, be aggressive in conflict. Duh. So Patton could also be attributed to the pharaoh of Exodus if we wanted to scrunch the chronology enough.
Oh yeah. No, or we could even go. I'd be more inclined to say MacArthur because he was quite a bit more, quite a bit more aggressive.
Yeah. Well then so did Patton.
Well, Patton wasn't,
anyway, we're just about nearing the end of the show here.
First.
Well, they never do, and that's the ideology problem. The other thing that I would be intrigued to have known, I can guesstimate, is how many people in the audience watching Nurre's show, or how many people who are credulously watching Nurre's video ever bothered to fact check any of it. And I would predict none of them. That they literally.
I've watched a few of these videos. I fact check, but then I'm not as usual.
Oh, but you're not watching it credulously. You're not watching it as a believer.
Why would I do that?
The believers,
that'd be stupid.
Yeah, the believers, and that's why you need to ask. If anybody decides to lob somebody like a Nurre at us, then the nice thing is you can say, okay, that's fine. How did you fact check it? And I've been using, and people follow me on Twitter. They know how often I'll ask this. How did you fact check it? And boy, have you noticed many people answering that question so far?
I found one that tried to tell me the Bible was the fact checking source. I laughed. It is
yeah. Well, and the Dineshistas that I go after, there was one that said, "Oh, Dinesh's books are beautifully documented. They're fully documented." No, they have footnotes. That's not the same thing as documentation. And only until you check out the references.
Have they read?
Yeah, only when you check out the
Dinesh's books. I mean, seriously.
I've read several of them. They're fun to do. They're, again, useful from a methods point of view because they're an insight. Literally, Dinesh D'Souza approaches data sets no differently than Nurre does, which is he has a non-negotiable dogma, and he only looks up information that corroborates it, and he relies on secondary sources that he doesn't fact check and misreads primary sources. I mean, what's the difference between them?
Only a lot, folks. Only a lot. But I also left you a link here, the Wikipedia link for the Indus Valley civilization, which did actually have written forms of language and died out in 1700 BCE. They apparently missed the global flood happening too.
Well, I had a reference. I had a reference to the Indus Valley because, of course, they fizzled out as a culture finally, and they predate all the Mesopotamian cultures. And because the creationists insist that the continents were just slamming around like mad now after in the post-flood period. The Pangaea, the modern world formed from the Pangaea supercontinent that formed after the flood. That's the current dogma that you find in Answers in Genesis at their Creation Museum. That Rodinia was the pre-flood continent. So they've got a lot of action going on really fast.
What?
And anyway, so I joked that Philip Johnson and Macbeth and some of the other, Casey Luskin and all of those, I didn't use his name at the time, but I could, that all the little creationist, anti-evolutionist lawyers that are out there should gather together in a class action suit and sue God because of the demise of the poor Indus civilization that apparently died from whiplash as India slammed into the Asian subcontinent in the course of the flood so fast that it just pushed up the Himalaya mountains and caused all the little Indusans to drop dead from the whiplash. And I think, yeah, maybe go for that class action suit.
Hold on a second. See, here's a problem. If you actually look at where things are, Rodinia covered the largest part of, covered a significant portion of both hemispheres. Pangaea was all down the south, and there were actually not one but two different Pangaeas, Pangaea and Pangaea Ultima.
No, actually, I think you got them backwards there. Pangaea is a north to south supercontinent. So that you've got the stuff that later breaks up into the North Atlantic and then the South Atlantic. It runs basically pole to pole, whereas Rodinia, chunks of it were heavily weighted in the southern hemisphere. And if you look at, say, where the Cambrian Lagerstätten are, they're all in the northern coast of this, but there are some land masses that eventually become parts of some of the rest of Laurasia that are occurring to the north. But most of the land masses are down in that southern pole, so it's got a very different dynamic going on. But anyway, the main thing is that the land masses are very, very different between the two, because you've got about 500 million years between them. And then about 500 million years, 200 million years or so between the breakup of Pangaea and the formation of our present continental system. Mm-hmm. So that any attempt to just willy-nilly amok that fast, literally over the course of a few years, is just twaddle.
But yeah, no, the snowball Earth and kind of tore Rodinia into some small pieces, and then over the course of snowball Earth, which is a few hundred million, which was a couple hundred million years itself.
Yeah, I think about 700 million years ago. That was just before the full Ediacara biota are coming on the scene.
You know, all of that landmass got its face rearranged. Mile thick sheets of ice will do that.
Well, you got the super snowball Earth thing is really an unusual one, because basically it's hyperglaciating everywhere. Mm-hmm. But the later parts, you've got smaller scale ice ages taking place much later, like the one in India, when India was still parked down next to Antarctica. That one is during the Silurian period, and there's a glaciated pole there. The fun part is, and this connects up to modern climate science, is that you've got the fact that what we try to work out for modern climate models, when you apply them to paleoclimate, you got to pay attention to what the ocean distributions were. You got to then work out what currents are, how thermodynamics is going. So if you've got most of your landmass in the southern hemisphere, and then you've got largely ocean and fragmentary archipelagos, you've got a very different circumstance going on. In our own climate, one of the things that President Trump seems to have no clue on is that, why is it so cold now? Well, it's because the oceans in the north are warming up fast enough that they alter the jet stream, and they also cause actual increase of ice down in the Antarctic zone because of the way that the ocean distributes heat down into the larger oceans that are in the southern hemisphere. And then you've got that jet stream that can suddenly knock cold air that's still cold up in the poles, warmer than it might have been otherwise, but still cold enough to freeze your ass off, being pumped south in a way that doesn't happen when the jet stream doesn't circulate so wildly. And so all of this stuff has been fairly apparent from the climate models, which, of course, none of the climate skeptics pay attention to.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's even...
Okay, well, we're past...
Yeah. Good.
We're past the 6 o'clock here. We do then a summarization of why I digress on an evolution hour to talk about creationists in Egyptology, because this is another applied methodology question. It's that the toolkit that you see me use all the time on Twitter and in hashtag tip and all the rest, and in Evolution Slam Dunk. And by the way, everybody who hasn't got Slam Dunk, get my book. You won't regret it. those methods are applied anywhere. You can apply them to politics, you can apply them to economic theory, you can apply them to any source on any subject whatsoever, because it's standard method. That when somebody makes a claim, you say, oh, interesting, according to whom, on what basis, on what evidence, how did you fact check that, what standards would you have to change your mind, what attempts did you to determine whether or not what you just said was true. And anybody that has their head up their ass won't be able to answer those questions. They'll fall apart in a source analysis. Anybody who has the ring of truth about them, and I hope you've been finding me with the ring of truth, I hope you don't take my word for anything, stuff, and determine that, gee, he actually plays fair with the facts, as well I should. I'm not infallible. I'm perfectly capable of making a mistake. In fact, I recently slammed into a Bertrand Russell scholar that called me to account for some views that I'd had on Russell, that when I look back in my notes, I discovered I depended on a single secondary source, and I had thought it was an okay one at the time. And had I known later on, I went back and re-researched and realized it was a flawed source. And so, boop, have changed my view on it. And when I get around to writing that section on Bertrand Russell, I will actually call attention to the mistake I made and how it was corrected. I've done that on frequent occasions in the work, because you learn by your mistakes. Nobody is perfect. Nobody is infallible. Nobody needs to be infallible. What you need to be is you always are careful. You're always honest. You never misrepresent a source's content. You never attribute something to something. You don't try to put words in people's mouths. You actively try to know what you know. And if you don't know it, you have to put a question mark on there and say, I need to look that up or check that out. And if you follow those rules in everything, you're less likely to suffer from cranial blockage of the rectum. So that would be the wonderful world of RJ. An hour for today. Thank you very much, Crocker Squirrel. Thank you, Marianne, who had to move out. And thank you, Peter, for coming on to the show and filling an hour of, hopefully, knowledge for people. And we are now stopping the broadcast.